Hello and welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast. My name is Mike Green, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode. We're going to talk about the Midwest. Yes, I know that's shocking. We're always talking about Texas or Florida or Utah or California or one of these big states. This week we're talking about the Midwest, and there's a lot of doctors that call us and they say, hey, you know what, I grew up in the Midwest and I went to school somewhere else and I just want to go back home. I want to find a place to practice, but I just can't find an area that's growing or has some good, strong demographic features to it. And we get it, and it's not easy. And so this episode for you, my friends of the Midwest that want to go home, I've got 5 areas that I think are worth consideration for a new practice owner. These are areas that are growing. These are areas that have potential. These are areas that I think in the next 5 or 10 years could potentially pick up speed on some of those areas, and they're definitely going to need new practitioners, be it dental or veterinary or optometry or orthodontics or whatever it is that you are. There's going to be new people, new families in these areas, and they're going to need you. They're going to need you to open up an office there and service them and find success there. Now, before we get into it, I want to make one quick announcement. If you are listening to this on your drive to work this morning, thank you so much for listening to it. We're so glad you're with us. However, you might be missing out on the video presentation of this podcast, which for this episode is kind of important because we're going to show some maps where with some pin drops of the specific areas that we think you might be interested in. And it would be easier to visualize it. But if you're not that and you just want to listen to it, that's fine as well. We'd love to have you along with us for the drive. So let's dive right in. All right, let's look at, before I go into the 5 areas, just want to give you some parameters of how it is that we're deciding which area is going to be good, or at least here in the Midwest, what are some of the features for those areas that we consider show strength or give us a positive direction that we can feel confident to recommend some of these areas. And some of these are true regardless, obviously, of where you are in the country, but some of them are very specific to the Midwest, as there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of labor, a lot of immigration that's happening in the Midwest. But here's a couple that we looked at specifically that I think will be interesting for you as you're looking at areas to potentially open up a practice. Obviously, annual population growth, super important, because a lot of these areas have been stagnant for quite some time, meaning that they have not grown very much. And so the people that live there, were born there, went and got a manufacturing job, raised their family there, retire there, they don't leave. And so the hard part about that is when you're a doctor that's not from the area, sometimes it's hard to break into those markets because they've gone to the same person for 20 years and they wouldn't consider leaving for any reason. And it's kind of hard to break into that way of routine that people have. And for new doctors, that can be a really big challenge that can keep you from finding as much success as what might be you may potentially have. Now, maybe you are from one of these small towns and you have a big name, or maybe your dad was the doctor, right, that has the big name. In that case, then none of these will really matter because you'll be able to slide right in and probably find success. But for those of you that are not, annual population growth is really important because you want to look at areas that are having things drive new population growth from outside of the area, usually driven by a new employer. That's bringing a large influx of people in, and you have as much shot at landing them as a client or patient as anybody else does. We want to look at unemployment. We want to make sure those rates are trending in the right direction. If these areas are the unemployment rate is going up and up and up, it's just not really something that you probably want to mess with too much unless you've got something very specific for those areas. Again, large employers is really what's driving a lot of the growth in the Midwest, and we really see that as picking up pace as a lot of these tech sectors, a lot of these giant manufacturing companies, auto manufacturers, we really think that's going to be a strong growth in the Midwest over the next 5 or 10 years. We want to look at residential shifts. A lot of these areas, well, several of these areas have new spots where developers are building lots of homes, and those residential shifts where maybe the north side of town was really strong and now it's south side of town, like I say, we'll drop some pins in the map and show you where we feel like is going to be strong over the next little bit in each of these areas. We want to look at state and local regulations. That something for some of these states is a real challenge that you've experienced the last 5 or 10 years, and many of you may have moved out of those states because of those local regulations. There's been some maturity to some of those state and local lockdowns that have happened where they saw the outcome in that a lot of business owners left because they were being over-regulated, and now they're kind of mending their ways a little bit, and some of those areas are starting to become attractive again for new offices to open. And then lastly is just national attention, right? And that's a big one for those of you that want to stay away from competition. I would say that all 5 of the areas that I'm going to mention today are certainly getting attention when it comes to the Midwest, but nothing in comparison to on the national stage where people are really looking at that has a huge influx of doctors that are moving to. It's not going to be a Phoenix or a Austin, Texas, or a Tampa, Florida, or one of these areas that has a lot of doctors moving in from all over the country that have no connections there. So with that said, let's dive into our first area recommendation, which might be a surprise. Well, I think all 5 of these actually will be a pretty big surprise for you. So Columbus, Ohio is the first one we're going to mention. There's some features there that I think make Columbus really an interesting area moving forward. And the number one is the affordable housing. Now, we can't look into the future. We don't know what that's going to do. But right now, Columbus is a pretty affordable place to live. And because of that, and because of the lack of affordability in mid to large size markets across the country, that affordable housing really puts Columbus in a league of its own, whereas that you can land a pretty good job, and we'll talk about jobs in a second, in Columbus, but you can also afford to buy a pretty nice house. And because of that, because of the families that are moving into these areas, the owner ratio and renter ratio in a lot of areas of Columbus is looking really, really strong. And so you, as a provider, you're going to be able to capitalize on those people that are buying those houses because they're going to need providers in that area to help them and their family. Columbus really has a pretty low unemployment rate. We've seen that trending down in Columbus, which is a great thing. And the reason that that's happening is because you have some massive employers that have moved to town. Intel in the New Albany area, they're investing massive amounts of money in that area that is going to drive a tremendous amount of jobs over the next however many years. I don't recall how many billions of dollars they're putting into it, but it's significant. It really is going to turn Columbus into what many people think of other tech-related areas across the country, because that sector in Columbus is driving a lot of new jobs. And guess what? These are great jobs. These are jobs that are filled by smart people, by educated people, that are people that are going to use and have our good, strong family tradition of taking care of themselves. And so they're going to go to the dentist very often. They're going to have a dog and a cat for the family that they're going to bring to the vet. They're going to do all these things to make sure that they have a great lifestyle. And those jobs that are being driven by companies like Intel, and Amazon is another one, is really driving a lot of that new population growth that's happening. So Intel, I mentioned Intel in the New Albany area. Anduril Industries, 4,000 jobs they're expecting bringing into the area. And then AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, has a pretty massive expansion that's happening in Columbus. We've seen a population growth of about 1% annually, which, for those of you that have worked with us in the past, you know that 1% is a pretty important number. It's a good benchmark that we can look at to how healthy of the growth is happening in an area. And so Columbus is seeing that. That's a rarity in the Midwest, but it's definitely a good positive sign for Columbus. So where at in Columbus? So Columbus really, it's on the outskirts for the most part. There definitely is some positive areas. Grandview Heights is one that is a little closer into town, and certainly if you want to stay in downtown, that's where you're at. But for the most part, you're outside of the 270. That's where most of the opportunity is, and we've seen that as a trend as people, and it's really a post-COVID trend, where people have moved out of the downtown area and are looking at those outskirts area. Again, I mentioned New Albany. A lot of people are going to be working up there, and so into that Intel office. And so it's driving a lot of that population that's going to the Hilliard, the Canal Winchester, the Pickerington, Powell, Dublin, Grove City. Those are all areas that are growing and look really, really good, are going to be continuing to provide good housing for the Columbus area. So Columbus, of the five that we're going to talk about, I would say that Columbus is probably has the most opportunity, the most growth, the most positive things happening for, at least in our opinion, for a mid-size Midwest city. And I love Columbus. Columbus is a great area, good lifestyle. You really can find whatever you want in Columbus as far as the type of neighborhood you want to live in, entertainment, shopping. Columbus is a great place to be, so we're pretty big fans of Columbus right now. All right, let's move over to Kansas City, Missouri. So Kansas City, Missouri has had a really interesting thing happen, and this has happened to other big. I'm just going to say it. Big sports towns across the country, especially in the Midwest, is as that team has success, it drives a lot of good positive energy into the area, and Kansas City is one of those areas that has seen that. There's been a $6 billion invested in the downtown improvements, the Power and Light District, the T-Mobile Center. Like, these are areas where they've invested heavy. And why? Because it's getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of people moving downtown. As a matter of fact, the downtown population in Kansas City over the past 20 years has quadrupled. And so kind of the opposite thing that you saw in Columbus and Kansas City, a lot of the people are actually moving downtown. So you have a lot of these kind of more urban lifestyle, mid-20s, early 30s. A lot of them are single people that are moving into that and experiencing that downtown market in Kansas City. And quite frankly, they love it. It's a great, vibrant area, and Kansas City is really a bright spot when it comes to this part of the country in the Midwest, where you can, again, find what you're looking for. There's a couple specific areas that we really like, and a couple that are outside as well of the downtown area. So, of course, downtown, of course, we like that. Gardner, Raymore, Olathe, Gladstone, Blue Springs, all areas that are growing pretty considerably and are good opportunities. Again, you can stay downtown where you have a big influx of population, but if you want to get out of the city a little bit, areas like Gardner, up and down the I-35, there's a lot of opportunity there. And so Kansas City is another area where you can certainly look at and say, hey, this is an area that we know that the city is investing quite heavily into the experience, the lifestyle, which is going to draw more employers, which is going to draw more people, which is going to draw more need for services. So Kansas City, many of you maybe are from Kansas City or that area. This is a good time to come home. We really like Kansas City. All right. So with Kansas City and with Columbus down, we're going to go to a couple of smaller markets now that are still great. They're kind of great in their own little way. Certainly don't have maybe as many options as Columbus and Kansas City, but we like Madison, Wisconsin. And Madison, Wisconsin's not an area that's really been on anybody's map, growth-wise and and as a place where you would really look at to open up a new practice and find success. But that tide is changing a little bit. If Wisconsin is an area that you want to look at, and that's the lifestyle you want, that's the weather that you want, that's the you've got family there, Madison's really not a bad area. Annually growing 1.2%, which is really quite good. You have a couple of large employers that have invested pretty heavily into that market. So Thermo Fisher Scientific and Abingdon, maybe mispronouncing that, Abingdon Health, which is a biotech company. There's really some good, strong energy, and specifically I would say in Fitchburg. So Fitchburg is an area that has had just dramatic growth. Matter of fact, I think it is the largest growing area in Wisconsin, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Queen Creek area in southeast Phoenix. It's outside the city a little bit. There's a lot of land to develop, and people that want to live in the greater Madison area, they're always going to be looking at Fitchburg. And so if you're looking at opening up a practice, we like Fitchburg. I think that it's an area that we would put as a big win, and an area to definitely that I think has the opportunity for somebody to go in and really plant a flag on the ground and say, hey, I am the dentist for this area. I am the orthodontist for this area, and really drive some strong marketing and capitalize on a lot of that growth that's happening. A lot of people that are moving in Wisconsin, they're kind of gravitating. If they want to stay in Wisconsin, they're gravitating towards Madison. And so they're going to find themselves in the Fitchburg area. So we really like Madison, Wisconsin. Okay, let's go to Nebraska. Now we're kind of going to a small market. Matter of fact, this is the smallest market of all of the ones that we're going to talk about, but we thought we'd throw this in. Mid-sized market, again, I think there's, it doesn't have a huge population of people. There's not a lot of surrounding population, certainly not surrounding population clusters, but what you do have is a pretty large influx of high education jobs, really in three different sectors. You have agricultural research, you have technology, and you have education. And you couple that with the layer of manufacturing jobs that have always existed in Grand Island, and you have an area that's kind of has the right combination of or the right formula rather for some good strong growth. And so Grand Island, again, small area, not a huge population grower, but one that I think that you should keep your eye on if you're looking for a little bit more of a rural lifestyle. Grand Island's definitely a place to consider. I think that there's some good opportunities there. I think that if you're wanting a little slower lifestyle, Grand Island is definitely a place, especially for Nebraska, kind of part of that Tri-Cities area that you could definitely look at as a consideration. All right. Our last recommendation for the Midwest, and let me just say, these are certainly not the only five. There are other small, mid-sized markets in the Midwest that we could certainly talk about, but these are ones that we would, if we were to put them all on the table, these are five that we like, that we think are quite good. So let's go back to Ohio for a minute and let's talk about Springfield. So Springfield has kind of had some interesting things happening. One of them, the past couple of years, there's been a really large Haitian immigrant influx to that area. Now, as I sit here in February of 2025, I don't know what impact the President Trump administration policies are going to have on that immigrant influx, whether it's going to slow down, whether it is going to disappear. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But up to this point, it's actually been a really large source of fuel into the area that's driven a lot of labor jobs that have happened in that area. The labor market in Springfield is strong. It's one of the strongest sectors in the Midwest. And so when you think of Springfield, you think of the labor market, and it's really quite strong there in this part of Ohio. A couple new employers, just for note, and I'm going to mispronounce these probably, but Topri American Corp. They make auto. It's a Japanese company that makes auto parts. They've got a new plant there, going to drive a lot of new jobs. Silflex, which is a Silfex, which is a semiconductor plant there, and then of course McGregor Metalworking is there as well. And so most of the growth that's happening are in areas that are right down in Springfield. The three that we kind of pointed to it's all on the south side, so south side towards Southgate. Like there's some good opportunity there. And as you go down kind of towards I-70, you start seeing some development that's happening of people that are wanting to be outside of the city a little bit. There's some good opportunities there for growth, absolutely. The Clifton Avenue area, which is right there close as well, downtown, and then the Burnett Road area. I would say those three areas in Springfield is where the population growth is happening. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where your practice has to be, but that is where both the city and developers are looked at as far as creating some new population growth with the population that is moving in there. Now, again, it's not high net worth population. It's not high income population, but it is population nonetheless, and they also need services. And so looking at those gives you the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I grew up in Springfield. I'm an Ohio person, and I want to make sure that I can be back there with family and friends. I would say that those are your opportunities when it comes to Springfield, Ohio. So that is 5 areas in the Midwest, small, mid-sized areas in the Midwest that we would consider as up-and-comers. And so hopefully if you have considered the Midwest, or maybe you have looked out the window as you've been flying over, you can point out and say, hey, you know what, there's some great opportunity in the Midwest, because Mike at Dr. Demographics told me that there was, and told me the why, which is really more important than the what. A lot of times you've got to know the why. What is driving the growth? We would love to help you here at Dr. Demographics. You can find us on the web at drdemographics.com. You can give us a call at 844-704-0499, or you can reach out to me personally. My email is mike@drdemographics.com. Would love to chat. If you have any questions, please just feel free to email me. I usually answer 10 or 20 emails every day, just small questions that people have. Happy to help you out if I can. And with that, we will see you on the next episode.